moment, I want just to welcome everyone to Talkaoke as we get a few more people in. What is Talkaoke? So we're a pop-up talk show, but you guys are our VIPs. So everyone here today, I am your host, Evie. My name's Evie, and you guys here today are our invited guests. So we're going to be getting you guys to debate, to discuss, to find out more about yourselves. This conversation can go anywhere, but we've got a big question to start us off with, which you can see behind me on the screen. In science we trust. So yeah, I think that's a good one to just have a little. Oh look, we've got some more people joining the screen as welcome as well. If you guys want to pop your videos on so we can see you, that would be great. If you guys want to at any point, if you turn your mic up when you speak and we can hear your thoughts. But now that we've got a few more people joining, I just want to say once more, I'm Evie. Welcome to Talkaoke. We're going to start kicking off the chat, I think, quite soon. So I guess we've got a good starting question, haven't we, Mikey, behind me? Like, do people trust science? In science we trust. I think we also, one of the titles for the event was, who do we trust? So it wasn't maybe necessarily do we trust science, but when we're trying to look for our information, who do we trust? So maybe that's a good one to start kicking us off with.
I mean, is there even such a thing as science, big S science? I mean, is there such a thing?
And can you trust it? Like, is it a monolith? Is it something that we feel that we need to treat as one big institution that we believe in? Or is it a little bit more complicated than that? I don't know. What do we think with the people in the room here today?
Well, science isn't a finite thing. It's ever evolving and changing, and the things that were right 5 years ago aren't right now. Like, it's never sort of finished and complete. So in terms of how we identify what science means as a discipline, as an ethos, I think, there's lots of ways you can interpret even just the phrase science.
And are you like, let's find a, thank you, Charlotte, who's kicked us off as our first guest for Talkaoke. Thank you very much. You get a round of applause there from the lovely Mikey. I want to find out, are you someone who knows a lot about science? Are you involved in science? Are you interested in it? Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Sure. So I'm from more of a humanities background. I studied classics and archaeology at university, so that kind of hybrid between the kind of humanities and science. And then sort of lots of presenting, acting jobs, and I'm an artist as well. And loop back round to museums, and I'm now working at the Natural History Museum as a science educator and at the Museum of Brands. Oh, thank you, Mikey, as a digital learning officer. So not exactly a traditional science background, but very involved in environmentalism as much as I'm interested, maybe not involved. That sounds more like an activist. But yeah, that's pretty much my connection with science.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So we've got a few strands here. We've got Charlotte works in the humanities, but she's very involved in science. She's quite engaged with it by the sounds of it. We've also got, I had the word environmentalism. Do environmentalism do we trust? That's a big topic at the moment. Does anyone agree with Charlotte? Does it feel like a big monolith, or does it actually, as Charlotte says, feel like something that you can't really define because it's always changing? Where are we going to go with this, guys? I've got to feel... Sunil, come in. Welcome.
Yeah.
And we'll go to you first, Sunil.
Yeah, as Charlotte mentioned, it's not an absolute thing, science. So we should not take it as a manual, but it's a method of inquiry. So it's there to be challenged. So science needs to be challenged every now and then. And it's not neat.
It's not neat, did you say?
Neat. Like, things go wrong. So if you take it as an absolute thing, if things go wrong, it's easy to lose trust in it.
So do you think actually the fact that it's quite messy and that there are mistakes that happen, do you think that makes people more nervous about science? Do you think it makes people more nervous about science?
I think people should be nervous about it.
Ah, brilliant. So we've got the brilliant. Thank you, Sunil. I had, before I go to Mikey behind me, I did see Polina. Did you have your hand up? You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I actually find the idea that science is changing very comforting. That means people are constantly looking for truth. And that's what we should be after. We should not take things as they are or as they have been. We should look for an improvement. And I think people are uncomfortable that science is changing. They would rather have it very dogmatic. And I think it is not a good attitude. We should be constantly looking for truth. I teach chemistry as a professor.
Fantastic. Oh, yes. Truth bomb dropped there. I like that. So we've got Polina, who teaches chemistry, and she, but yeah, so I think it's more that she has a lot of faith in that constant search for truth. But you know, can that constant search for answers for truth, is that something we should always be looking into? Again, you know, we've got lots of. Oh, actually, Mikey, I promised to go to you first.
No, I mean, if it's something that's always, it's a bit shifty then science, if it doesn't actually ever kind of, I mean, is that why perhaps people have got sometimes, you know, like I saw a meme on Facebook a couple of days ago, you know, with like adverts for DDT and heroin and something else, you know, some sort of, you know, science, basically chemistry, chemical products, which these days are not considered, you know, and it said like, there's no flies on me because I use DDT or something like that, you know, so can we actually trust something that's always changing where, you know, it is always being updated? It's a bit like that shifty person that always moves the goalposts.
Okay. So, you know, so you think science is kind of a monolith, maybe because it's always shifting its goalposts. Maybe it's a bit of almost a runaway train. Maybe we haven't got quite control of this field of research that we seem to be, so far, we seem to be quite positive about. But we're skeptical of, perhaps. I think I can see we've got a few more people who've joined us. If you guys want to pop your mics on so we can see you as well, I might just...
Camera, I think you mean there.
Oh, did I say mic? Sorry, I meant camera. Pop your mic on when you want to speak, though. That's always good.
Yeah.
I saw, Katie, you were kind of smiling to yourself a little bit just then when we were talking about science being a bit shifty, maybe moving the goalposts. Did it spark anything that you agreed with or disagreed with?
Thanks, and hello everyone. Sorry, I'm a bit late.
Welcome.
Well, I think we spoke about something very similar last time, how the only constant thing is change. So maybe from one standpoint, probably a little bit more evolutionary, we want kind of safety of the same, but at the same time, I think it's much wiser. I think it's kind of a difference between habit and wisdom or something like that, where instead, if we accept that, you know, this is the best we've got, but let's be open about it changing in the future, I think that would be kind of the golden middle between either saying that everything is wrong or trying to stick to whatever it has been.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so Katie's saying, you know, last time we were talking about, on this session, we were sort of talking about where do researchers get their ideas from? And then that sort of kind of morphed into this discussion, as Katie says, about the fact that things are always changing. Are people comfortable with change? But, you know, and what is progress, I guess, as well. So often science is something that we uphold as like a concept that allows us to progress as humanity. But there are things that we maybe disagree with it as well. So Mikey pointed out DDT, which I think, am I right in saying was a pesticide, Mikey?
That's right. It was a pesticide. It was very cheap to make and widely used, I think in the 50s and 60s, until they realized that it didn't break down. So then, you know, I think even now you can still find a kind of trace level of DDT, you know, in all kinds of environments, because it's one of those, you know, a bit like, I think we're more worried about, what was it called now? I can't remember. The other breakdown products from chemicals, from plastics, should I say. Maybe some dioxins. We're a bit more worried about that right now. But yeah, I mean, I guess things evolve, and we find these things out. We don't know the answers, and then we find out that, okay, maybe let's invent a better pesticide.
Okay, so it's more, yeah. So that was like a pesticide that was really popular, and then we realised, oh my gosh, it's caused really lasting damage to the environment, or we might have to pull this back slightly. I think Margot, you had a hand up.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking about because I'm not a scientist, I'm a little bit interested in it, but I'm almost like just general public here speaking in a way. But I noticed that whenever very often there'll be when the product is being advertised or something like this, there's like, oh, science says this is like really legit, and people go like, well, clearly then that has to be the thing that I should be trusting. I should buy this product because there's got it's got this person in white lab coat on it, and and they tell me these things and they say there's the research to back this up. And I just wonder if there's a way of kind of telling from unless for just someone from general public whether that is a legit thing or not, because I feel like it's a trump card these days. Like if you say this is scientifically proven, there's like, well, clearly then that's a thing. But like you were saying, Charlotte, it's an ever evolving thing, science. So when do we know it's evolved, or how can we tell it's evolved in a positive way or in a good way, or and when is it evolving just to kind of suit somebody else's sales figures? I don't know, like how do you tell?
So it's almost like you say, oh, well, it's because of science. Someone says, oh, I read it in a scientific paper. Well, maybe if they read it in a scientific paper, but, if someone might say, well, this is scientifically proven, is your worry that maybe it kind of shuts down debate or questioning or critical thinking?
Yeah, I think so. And I think also because of my family being based in Poland, and a lot of them are saying like, no, we're not taking AstraZeneca because research said or shown, and there's the kind of the limit to which you accept the research, and beyond that it's like, no, I've made up my mind already, so I'm not going to accept any other research. So yeah, so what do we do?
There are quite a few reactions there, which is brilliant. But I'm going to go to Sunil. You've got your hand up. Do you want to chime in on this?
No, I understand the concern, but I think like science is the best understanding that we have. So it's our best understanding of the situation. So what else do we do? Do we trust our gut or do we trust our instinct?
Yeah, so when you're saying if it comes down to kind of like a debate or an argument, or if someone's saying, well, actually this has been scientifically proven, you would go for the, well, actually this has been scientifically proven side of the argument. Well, not argument, but it's a debate.
Yeah, it's they are just saying, okay, this is what we found. So this is our understanding of it. And this is the best that we could do. It might be different, but this is our best estimate.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, like this is our best estimate in a world of different differing opinions. Science allows you to have this best estimate, or yeah. Alex, you were nodding a lot to that as well. And then I'll go to Charlotte, but Alex first and then Charlotte.
Yeah, I completely agree with Sunil here. The thing is, when a paper comes out and a study comes out, okay, this is what we know, and this is what we found with an objective methodology. And normally then you have other teams around the world that take that study and replicate it and see if that is possible. And then sometimes we find that actually, no, it can't be replicated. So what's happened there? So science is just about discussing, and the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know, and we have to keep learning. So yeah, also if I have to trust something, I trust science, because it's a debate, and it's not just to I believe in this. No, I have the data, and yeah, it's a debate, and we continue to look at the data.
Excellent. So yeah, Alex has sort of added on to that, and so yeah, it's about the data. It's about replicating that data. It gives us like a framework on that best estimate, as Sunil said as well earlier. Charlotte, you also wanted to say something on this distinction.
Yeah. Mine was more the sort of, authenticity of source material, which I think is really problematic at the moment, because, yeah, as you say, hopefully you do get these well-adjusted, well-controlled experiments to produce this pure data. But how is the data disseminated to the general public and to people we know? Is it garbled it through like social media and the kind of echo chamber that creates? Is it like Chinese whispered through bits and pieces about, is this vaccine safe or not? It's so hard, like Margot was saying, it's so hard to actually get to the root of that because everyone's got a public opinion essentially now. And so that really confuses the narrative. It's great that we can share our opinions, but for me, obviously, I'm not a hugely scientific background, but I, want to listen to the people that knew what they were talking about, rather than the noisy news feed on my social media page.
That's brilliant. We've got a couple of new people who've just joined as well. So I'm going to say welcome, James. Welcome, YC and Simon. I'm not sure we've said hello to you yet, but welcome for joining Talkaoke. We've been debating kind of a bit about, why do people put more trust in science? At the moment, we've got a few advocates saying, it's because it's our best estimate. It's our best way of knowing in a world of uncertainty. Whether something is right or wrong, right or wrong, or whether something is more effective than something else. AstraZeneca has come up a couple of times, this new vaccine, which has had some controversy in Europe, and maybe possibly people talking about it in the UK as well. Charlotte mentioned, there's information on social media, there's information in the news. I wonder, does anyone here have an opinion on that story unfolding? Does anyone know a bit more about the story and they want to kind of explain it and then say something about what they think about the whole thing? I've got Mikey behind me that also has a sign on him saying, "No flies on me."
No, I mean, I think Paulina wanted to say something because you just unmuted yourself. So.
Oh, Paulina, come in.
Sorry, I'm not going to answer the question that you just asked. I just had to follow up
That's
on
your
the
right on
Talkaoke. Yeah. I think some of the stuff that the panelists really addressed here is, I think, the importance of inquiry itself. And one of the things we all should learn somewhere in our education is how do we critically look at the data and how do we think for ourselves? And most of the folks think that it is some sort of a thing only for scientists, only exclusively for scientists, that it is privilege of the scientists only to look at the data and tell the rest of us poor pumpkins what to do. However, this idea of you thinking critically should be applied to all aspects of our lives. And people feel extremely uncomfortable thinking about that. I mean, look at the religion. Every time the religion was challenged, every time the dogma of religion was challenged through the centuries, people were literally burned at the stake because that's how uncomfortable people are looking at truth. The political movements, every time there is a thinker who challenged the government or the political system, people get jailed, shot, persecuted. So this idea of inquiry is something that we are familiar with and not particularly comfortable with, but we should continuously employ this all through our lives, not just for the science. Science just gives us better tools. And because they're very structurized, people are kind of like, oh, I'm not comfortable with tools. I think there's great comfort in having a set of tools and applying it and reaching consensus, discussing this with other people, because that's what, the civil discourse goes for. This is how the conversation goes.
Brilliant. You're getting some good reactions there from Mikey on the sound desk as well. So it's almost this idea of inquiry. It's part of science, but it's also maybe something a bit more overall important to humanity. You've also got quite a few hands there, so I'm going to jump straight to Katie first of all.
Thanks. Actually, I really love what Paulina just said, and I really totally agree with it. And I would love to throw a little bit of a curveball. I usually very strongly argue for science and such. However, at least in my circle, one of the reasons a lot of people I know, probably around half, at the moment they don't trust science as much as they did, let's say, a decade ago, is because they were disillusioned in a very large way on a topic that they were passionate about, which in this particular case was actually a UFO topic, because science was denying any life detected anywhere around us. Whereas then suddenly 3 years ago, Pentagon just came out and said, well, they're all over the Earth. so here comes the contradiction, where both government and scientists were stating for decades that these things don't exist, and then government suddenly comes out and says, well, yeah, it's been here all along. So then people suddenly feel kind of, I don't know, I don't even know the word how they feel. Just
so you're saying,
Duped
Katie,
would have been the word.
the UFO
yeah,
topic.
yeah,
So
pretty
duped.
much. And then they go like, so how do we trust any of these two, whether it's government or the scientists going forward, if this is the history? And like, who can have the authority then to actually tell us the truth? If, like, whom do we trust? And I think it triggers kind of a little bit of a breakdown in society, where people suddenly have no idea where to turn. And some personally can find, I was lucky enough where I could spend a year in furlough and read a ton of papers, like over 100 definitely, about science, quantum physics, and so many other subjects I could, but not everyone gets that luxury. So I can, at the end of the day, trust myself, but people who don't have that time, which is the majority of the people, I believe, then what?
So do you think we should to get more people perhaps to be engaged in science, to feel like that they can have an opinion or feel understandable? Should we put the population on furlough for a year to really engage with science? Is this a new form of science communication?
No, I think it is a little bit more complicated and deeper than that. I think that we need to first figure out, how did the problem come about? And from what I've heard, a lot of even scientists have stated that the bureaucracy and financing of science is kind of a big part of that problem, which very often can hold the science back or even turn it sideways. I mean, as an example, I like to use among my friends, we invented electric automobiles before we invented internal combustion engine. But then we had to wait 100 years until all the oil corporations got satisfied, and we came to much bigger problems till we get our electric car back. So and it's not just one rare story. There are hundreds of them on so many different inventions. So whom do we trust, and how can that trust maybe be built? Because it seems that in many areas it has to be built from scratch almost.
Okay, so I think what you're saying, Katie, is that there's actually, and it'll be interesting to hear if anyone is working in science on around our virtual Talkaoke table. But actually, the way that science is structured at the moment, it means that it doesn't necessarily benefit science moving forward, and actually maybe it generates a bit of mistrust with the public as well. Perhaps I think James, you've put your hand up. Welcome, James, to the Talkaoke table. It's lovely to have you. Tell us your thoughts.
So I think that point about batteries and early electric cars is interesting, because let me just pop something out my head for a second here. Because this is an example of the problems with any sort of early electric propulsion. That's a hearing aid. So back way, when the first ones came out, they had battery packs that you had to clip to your waist. And we're talking before I was born, sort of my grandparents, my parents' time. And they got smaller and smaller until you've got something the size of a pinhead that can sit in my ear and power this thing for a week. So, there's a tendency to easily find heroes and villains in stories, whereas science is not a dogma. And feeling that science is the new religion and you have to stick with what is said now is something that I try and dispel. I know you get a lot of very loud and vocal scientists who want to. So what Polina was saying there made me think immediately of Richard Dawkins, who the sort of person who will decide to take on people of faith who dislike science at exactly their own level, with exactly their own tactics, with exactly their own preachy sort of behaviour. Whereas I think the important thing to get across with science is it's people having a conversation. That people should be more comfortable with uncertainty, because that is how we move forward. And it's okay to say you're wrong. It's been very difficult over the years for people to accept retractions. in science. I mean, my own PhD, I had to revise about half of that in the last year of it because one of the main papers I was depending on was retracted because they'd mismeasured some things. And I mean, that was a right pain for me, but it taught me that you need to be comfortable with uncertainty and comfortable with just speaking up and discussing things.
Brilliant. So thank you, James. So yes, I mean, some really good stuff there. So, James saying science is not a dogma and we have to be aware of the kind of like spiritualization or the religiosity around science. We have to be careful. But also that, we should be more comfortable with uncertainty. So that we should be more comfortable with being prepared to change our ideas if the evidence says so. Do people disagree or agree in this situation? Does anyone think that, Mikey, you've popped a hand up.
Well, no, I just wanted to say, we've got quite a lot of new faces. People are new to Talkaoke. The whole point of this is up to you where you want to take this discussion. So I mean, for me, I think there's lots of different examples coming out. There's the example of of the electric cars, of UFOs, of of Richard Dawkins. I'm just recapping on all these things because it's up to you where you want to take this conversation. And do you want to talk about this question of dogma versus a kind of changeability? Is science a conversation, or that point about critical thinking? All of these things are in the mix, and it's kind of up to you what you want to pull out of that and what direction you want to take it in. So there's a lot going on here. So I just wanted to say to people, you take it in the direction you want to take it in.
And on that note, Charlotte is going to take us to a new direction, or a direction that she chooses.
It's bit of a rehash, to be honest. I just wanted to kind of touch on the religion point that you kind of we've been brought in with a few people, with Polina and with James as well. And I think having it as science v religion is just unhelpful to both camps and also to individuals who identify as anywhere amongst those, binaries. I think we're trying so hard to break down binaries, but the science religion one is still quite strict. And this is something I've experienced at university, went to UCL and had a lot of, I think I've encountered more angry atheists than I've encountered angry religious people in my life. And I am a Christian, and I think I draw my own line with it, but I'm happily in the part of that, part from column A, part of column B camp, where I think you can pick and choose a bit of both. And 100% agree with Polina, the critical thinking inspires most of my everyday life. It's like, what of that do I like and agree with? What of that do I like and agree with? And then do find my own way with both camps. But I think it's polarizing too, trying to have the kind of two people against each other and two camps against each other. And this is something we see in every walk of life at the moment, where if you look at how extremely polarized politics is getting, you're either super, super left or super, super right. You can't be anything in between. And there's no nuance, that ties in with cancel culture as well. So lots of different things where you're being almost manipulated to completely be at odds with each other. And I don't think that's helpful to the discussion at all.
Excellent. So, there's loads of stuff there that we can unpack. So I'm going to throw that all out there. We've got that kind of distinction, that pitting against of religion and science. And is it unhelpful? The angry atheists, more angry than perhaps than the people who are religious. We've got cancel culture that was in there as well, and that's kind of an increasing polarized society. Got loads of stuff here. What kind of opinions are there around our virtual Talkaoke table? Mikey behind me.
I just want to pick up on the one thing that Charlotte said about this kind of adversarial nature. That I think this is in a way part of our tradition in the Western world, that you've got two people with two opposite motions, and they've got to sort of fight it out, and one's right and one's wrong. And quite often they're both a bit right. And what we like to do at Talkaoke is kind of why we've got this round table. Normally people sit around this table. We'd be in Cambridge with people around the table, and they'd all be on the same side, and it would be more about what do we agree with, what do we disagree with, we like each other, so I think in a way we need to move on from this adversarial culture.
James has got his hand up to respond to this adversarial culture. Oh, we might need to. You need to. You've put your hand down, but you haven't unmuted. There we go.
It's sort of become a bit of a truism or a shibboleth that people think that everywhere is getting more divided, everywhere is getting more polarized. But then if you actually go down to your own level in your own life, can you see it? So there's a report that came out a few months ago from a large survey from a group called More in Common, that was trying to sort of see if there was a divide in British society, and if so, where it lied. And they found that Britain was a lot less polarised. I'll just, can I share links in the chat?
Sure.
Then,
of course, yes, please.
Let's chat that. Yeah, there you go. So they've got a report there. A lot less polarised than is typically portrayed. A lot of the very polarizing comments and voices are from roughly, I think, 10% of Twitter users, social media commentators, politicians, etc. But you see those more, and people have a tendency to recall negative experiences about 5 times more strongly than positive experiences. So it's always worth taking another look at these sort of assumptions and saying we hear this a lot, we see this a lot in sources, but do we actually see that in everyday life?
Brilliant. So James, you're kind of like pulling apart maybe the questions that we put. Do we actually believe is the questions that we're talking about polarization, about this sort of growing polarization in society, does it actually exist? James has actually, and he's just dropped the link in the chat, that maybe that's not the case. Maybe we believe that we're more polarized as a society, but are we actually? We've got some new people who've joined as well. So we've got Larice, D, YC, Simon. If you guys want to pop your videos on so we can see you, we can see your reactions. And so I can see if you guys do want to say something, please feel free to chip in at any time. Paulina's just waved her hand because she would like to say something. So I'm going to go to you, Paulina.
I really like what James is pointing out, this polarization. It actually surprises me almost every day why science is polarized. Science is one of the most objective things that looks at evidence. In fact, out of all things that should not be polarized, it should be science. So I think the science itself, the consensus within the sciences, whether it is agreed or disagreed, is much more civil. When it becomes polarized, and I don't know where you folks most are, I'm in United States. Everything became so politicized in the past few years, including science. And it was not on the science doing. It was people who tried to interpret the science for either their political gain or for their monetary gain. So when we're looking on how the science is perceived, and somebody posted the question saying, well, how would I know how to interpret all of that? And Katie said at some point that, yes, I had the luxury of interpreting it by myself, but the rest of the folks has to listen to somebody else. Sometimes it's not the right people who interpret the science. Like really, the political, the word government was thrown around. Government is not scientists, unfortunately, in many cases. So there is the disconnect between the citizen who consumes the science and the scientists who produce the science. There is a distance between them. This is where the problem lies. How the science being twisted for gain.
That's really interesting. It's actually, and it's, a theme that actually came up in our last Talkaoke session as well, of that you have a group of scientists who want to talk about their work and they want to make sure that people understand it in a sort of fair, objective manner. And then there's a way of trying to distill all that information down to the general public. And as Paulina says, are the right people doing it? Is the right information getting out there, or is it being used for political gain? Mikey wants to add something into
Just on the back of what Paulina is saying, I just would want to just ask, what would a government of the scientists look like? Would a scientifically based government actually look like? And would it do better? We're here in the UK, so we're probably thinking of the UK government, but we could easily include the US government.
Yeah, it was probably going to be all white and male, unfortunately. It's changing. There is definitely an issue on how scientists communicate. They have a lot of learning to do. Alan Alba wrote a book quite a while back, if you ever read that. It was something, I'll look it up. It said something to the point like, would I have this look on my face if I understood what you were saying? So something like that. And it was about the scientific communication on how science delivered the message. So yes, there are some issues. We're working on it, I promise.
So what would a government of scientists look like? Maybe you don't actually like the current look of the government of scientists, but Paulina's saying it is changing. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the chat as well. Alex cryptically just put into the chat when we said, what would a government of scientists look like? She just put Germany. So Alex, we need some more information on this. Can you explain a bit more for us?
No, it was just because Angela Merkel is actually a chemist, and she's been praised of how she's been taking on the pandemic until now, with a very clear listening to the scientists. Not like in Spain. I'm Spanish, and in Spain we've done just gone against what all our science representatives were telling us, and it was a mess. So it was just Germany always came up because of this.
So maybe her educational background, her expertise as a scientist, perhaps helped her communicate with her own government scientists better. Perhaps it allowed her to understand more. Again, we had this kind of concept of, do we have a government of scientists? Are scientists bad at communicating? Do we have any scientists on the chat who maybe want to either defend themselves or give their opinions about how scientists communicate? And we've also got some new people who have joined. So if you guys want to pop your cameras on so we can see you, please do. Welcome also to Roisin or Roisin. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name. Rasheen. There we go. I've got a nod from Rasheen. Fantastic. Where are we going to get? Mikey, you've got a point that you want to make. First of all.
Yeah, I mean, and in a way, what we've discovered with Angela Merkel and Margaret Thatcher is that people can be scientists and politicians at the same time. I suppose, in a way, I would. How much politics is there in science? I'm not a scientist, so I don't know this. But maybe there's quite a lot of political training that Angela Merkel and Margaret Thatcher had already in the lab before they ventured out onto the hustings.
Brilliant. So we've also got a few. So Margaret Thatcher was also brought up as an example. Quite a different, perhaps is it controversial to say quite a different politician to Angela Merkel? Popular, more popular? I don't know. As a person in the middle of the Talkaoke table, I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but for those people who are new to Talkaoke, the person who's hosting in the middle of the table is not allowed to give their own opinions. So I have to rely on you. I'm a neutral host. I can't share any of my own opinions on this in this topic. But yes, scientists, morality, politicians. Where are we going to go with this, guys? Mr. Whippy Ice Cream. Charlotte.
I sort of wanted to take it into how science can be a bit of an intimidating subject for people, which implicates how their whole development with science and relationship with science throughout their life, if they've been put off by scientific subjects at school or not encouraged to pursue them, if they weren't the top achievers, then there might always be that kind of disconnect or almost resentment towards science, which could lead to a kind of mistrust of scientific information and also a lack of confidence in yourself to perform the critical thinking we've all been speaking about being really important. So I think that's something in the kind of heritage institutions we're trying to do, is trying to make young children excited about science, and it's not a sort of far abstract, scary subject that I think it can feel like for some kids. So yeah, I think that would be an amazing thing to try and just foster in society so that it's not so out of reach. And that means you can form the opinions yourself and interpret the data yourself, rather than having to put your trust in politicians you may or may not like we've just been speaking about, and in governments we may or may not like, because I personally I've just been very disillusioned by governments recently, especially in possibly the handling of recent international events, which we probably are very bored of talking about. So in that opinion, I think you don't want to take your scientific knowledge from governments and positions of power, because whether that was in the medieval times when religions would abuse that position of power, as we've been speaking about, and burn witches at the stakes, or if that is now when governments can possibly skew that position of power, or huge pharmaceutical companies can skew that position of power as well, and then get loads of bonuses for asking GPs to prescribe antibiotics that they didn't necessarily need.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlotte. So there's always this question of power going on with the information that we have in society, with that suits people's agenda perhaps as well. Brilliant. Oh, welcome, Simon, as well. I'm not sure if you've popped your camera because you want to say something, or just and you just joined and like to say hello.
Well, I can do both.
Fantastic.
I've been listening in anyway. I just wanted to lead on from something that Paulina and Charlotte just touched on there as well, where you were talking about what a technocratic government of scientists would look like, and Paulina alluded to the fact that it'll probably be white and male, which, yeah, unfortunately is true. But science was used as the justification to prioritize that group as the kind of superior group in society, whether that be racially or, gender-based as well. So there's a natural dubiousness that comes from science and the misappropriation of science, I guess. Although science is supposedly the more objective kind of way to proceed and make decisions, it's no wonder that there is some cynicism about how it's used and how it's interpreted. And I think that disillusionment is what's distancing a lot of people from science and kind of uptaking it more. Margot mentioned earlier on, actually, that science holds a kind of prestige in terms of, we can prove this scientifically, so therefore it's, more important. But actually, I think at the moment, in my circle anyway, which of course we're all in our own little echo chambers at the moment, but there's a real dubiousness about science in general, and science is actually working as maybe the antithesis to prove something, which is really ironic because we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater there, I think.
How do you think we can change this disillusionment? I mean, lots of people have talked again. This is a theme that's come up about this disillusionment with science or with experts, with government. What would be the solution to that? There's a shrug from Simon. Not sure whether we can say that. James.
Okay, so one of the reasons I actually took my hearing aid out to demonstrate that point about how sometimes technology needs to catch up with another one. So, for example, electric cars need to catch up with power-dense portable batteries, like lithium batteries that you can get in charge plates these days, is I wanted to point out that scientists can be disabled people too. I mean, yes, I'm white, I'm male, I've got a beard that I can stroke. But one of the reasons that I think this sort of scientific public engagement thing is important is to show that with scientists, just people doing a job, we look like you, we have the same interests. It's just one of our interests happens to be knowing a lot more about one particular facet of the world and then trying to talk with people about that. And what I wish that I'd learned earlier on in my career, and more people did learn earlier on in their career, is how to tell stories and how to listen. Because quite often we can frame presentations in science as very, okay, so these facts, and now we're going to add this on, and we're going to get to this abstract, which is a short story in itself, but it doesn't really give any further context. And being able to not just explain things to people with solid grounding, but to explain that to your mom or your uncle or your mate down the pub who never studied science is, I think, something that is always worth just practicing, to feel comfortable talking about science in as general or specific a term as your audience wants to hear, and then listening to them back.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, James. I think that's a really nice point. Though I'm not allowed to give my opinions, I'm going to put that opinion out there. So scientists, it's important to actually show that scientists are humans too. They're just doing their job. It just so happens that their job is to do this research. That it's a skill to learn about how to tell a story, how specific or non-specific to go. And Paulina, you look like that inspires some thoughts in you.
He brought the important point that representation really matters. diversity really matters. Whether we're talking about the technocratic government of scientists, that obviously is not a good idea, because exclusion, that's what brings the distrust in people. They said, these people are not like me. How could I understand them? Whether they look different from me, they're educated differently from me. They have different accent than me. All of that really matters when people try to understand what the message is. So it is very important to speak the language. And when I say speak the language, I'll get away from jargon and tell the stories, because this is how you can, and it is so important in communication with sciences to not patronize people and assume that they cannot understand you, and we have to use baby talk when we're explaining science. So not patronizing, assuming that they're equals. Bring diversity to the table. That's what the important part is. And that's how it will become less politicized and more understandable and relatable. And participation in sciences are important. I mean, this whole week when I watched various presentations, and some of them were so above and beyond my understanding. Like literally, I would sit through a whole hour and then I'll be like, what was that all about? I was just floored. I was like, I have no idea what I have just watched. And I consider myself a fairly educated person. So there is a lot of stuff we do not know. And another thing that James pointed out earlier, we should be comfortable knowing that we do not know a lot of things, and not to take not knowing as an enemy of ourselves and the enemy of the people and just the enemy. Uncertainty is very unsettling, and a lot of people don't like it. So we should get comfortable with that. And scientists admitting not knowing should be celebrated. People don't like that at all. When scientists say, we don't know, and they're like, well, you're a scientist, you're supposed to know everything. And I'm like, that is not what science is all about at all.
Excellent, fantastic. So I think there's some, like, we shouldn't forget that, actually James and Polina's points where they were both in this answer to the question of, like, we was noticing people becoming disillusioned with science or experts. So what's the solution? We have Polina saying, we need to make sure that we humanize people, that we have a diverse representation of people in science, so that people can identify with scientists and say, yes, I see you as human beings, I can see you like me. We also have this idea of being more comfortable with not knowing as well, so not knowing things. So maybe that's how we can solve things. Charlotte has also got perhaps a solution, perhaps just another thought.
It's more of a rant, actually, I'm afraid. So this is maybe jumping from James's point. I think the reason why we get skepticism and disillusionment is again connected to power. Who is giving the grants? Who, with this huge amount of money, is targeting the different scientists to investigate the things they want to investigate in a way that they might have already predicted the data that's going to be produced? So in terms of facilitating research, that can be a problem. I know it's been a little bit misused in the plastic pollution issue recently. So these scientists and activists keep going to governments and the organizations that are actually going to be able to turn these issues around. And they keep getting pushed back and being like, oh, just give us more data. We need more data, in a way that they're just being battered away because they don't want to deal with it right now, because it's cheaper and easier to continue with these manufacturing practices and transportation practices that they've been doing for the past 40, 50 odd years. So there is that frustration connected with the power again. And then if it is the power that is the other people offering the money out, then there can be possibly skepticism about the research that is being done. And who gets given the money, as we've been speaking about? Is it a very unique type of person, or, that specific look we've been speaking about, the white male? Is that a targeted thing? I don't know. This is just sort of like ideas I'm throwing out there, but yeah.
Who are the funders, and who is doing the funding? Who is getting the funding? And is that what is creating this gap of mistrust? Katie?
Thanks. Again, probably since some audience is new, I want to bring a point from the last talk, because I still want to push it forward, because if more people are aware and if more people like it, maybe it's worth something. We spoke how, you know, government very in large ways funds scientists, and very often people disagree with the way that it's funded. So wouldn't it be a great idea if, you know, some part of the budget would go according to the way the government wants to put it, and another part would be distributed to citizens as, you know, kind of science vouchers. You give it to whatever science group you want to give it to, and they do the research. That way they will be motivated both to communicate in an understandable way, and as well as to do, people will know that they have the power to impact where research is being done.
Great. So Katie's picking up on a topic that has come up before, or in another Talkaoke session.
Well, it was the
last Talkaoke
the
session.
previous Cambridge Festival session.
Where do people get their ideas? But it, you know, it came on to the fact of should we be able to give people vouchers or a budget so that the general public, the voting public, can have a say in what kind of research gets done. James, did any of those kind of points inspire you to say something?
So yeah, it's one of my favourite political concepts, actually. It's called participatory budgeting, and it's been done. One of the most famous examples was a city in Brazil, which I can't quite recollect, but if you search for participatory budgeting,
Porto Alegre, isn't it?
But yeah, I think it's Porto Alegre. And the idea that a portion of a city's or a government's budget is assigned to either like a focus group of citizens or a citizen assembly or via direct voting for them to prioritise where it gets spent. And I think that'd be a brilliant idea for science, because then you can just directly point back and say, yeah, we're looking at this because people are interested in it. It's not about your research impact. It's not about a government grant or a large research organisation's grant or a charity with a particular group that they're looking to help and they need information on. It's just, but this sounds interesting, or we care about it, or we think it will help someone we know. And yeah, that is definitely something that I think should be out there. I mean, the other way that we do get grants and becoming increasingly important these days is literally turning up to things like this. And the Wellcome Trust is a big funder of sort of health and biological research in the UK, and they really, really want scientists to be able to listen to and talk with the public, and that's becoming more and more a condition of actually getting any money.
I'm going to go to Mikey behind me.
Well, I just want to do a little experiment because, you know, this idea of the science voucher or whatever it is, like citizens getting to choose where to put their science. We talked about the pros and cons of it last week, but I just want to put this out there to everyone in the session today. Where would you, if you had a voucher that you could spend on some kind of scientific research, where would you spend it? I would just want to see where, you know, where people will actually spend some of this cash.
Excellent. So, oh, and welcome to Val, who's just joined as well. Yes. Does anyone have any inspiration where they would want to spend their science voucher? And if you're sort of hesitating, why do you think, what's causing that hesitation? Perhaps.
Well, I think we should bat it back to James because he was kind of jumping on the idea. So maybe we should find out where he would put his money.
It's a really good question, because my instinct when put on the spot would be to probably say something that I find scientifically interesting. But really, if I had time to sit down and maybe a list of organisations that had applied for grants, it would be something that caught my interest and I thought would just not get funded generally. Something that might not have a big ticket application, because that kind of research leads to other outcomes that you would never see coming. Like, as the classic example, how many things that we use day to day started off as part of a space program?
Oh, brilliant. So James would probably fund something that maybe is a sort of underfunded or little known, because you might see that as like actually quite a fruitful area of research, even if it doesn't have directly practical results. And Polina, you seem to have some thoughts on that as well.
I do. I recall, that this actually is done right now. This is in the United States, you can apply for federal funding. And when you say federal, you do not go to your congressman, you go to National Institutes of Health, you go to NSF. And then you can go to private foundations, Michael J. Fox Foundation, Susan B. Komen. Those are people donating money directly to these foundations because they want that research to be done. So it is already in progress. However, there is a danger of enabling public to donate money to research because foundational research will suffer. I recall a statement that Michael Faraday was making in front of the House of Lords, or it was in front of our ex-chancellor, was asking him like, and sir, what would be the value of your research? And he said, because one day you will tax it. And he was talking about his research on electricity. And they were like, what is this ephemeric electron you're talking about? Who would? So, when you say citizens will be funding things, it could be a lot of shortcomings on them, because citizens want to have immediately problem solved. We want to solve malaria, be gone, cancer, be gone, pollution, be gone. The foundational research is what actually solves these problems. Yes, there is a lot of applications, but there is a lot of foundations in science where people study the riddles of, tree falls in the forest and nobody's there. Some people just cannot imagine studying such things or seeing a value in it, because we're right now trying to put a dollar sign on scientific inquiry. And there is a danger in that because sometimes it is not measurable. It's the same thing, like we try to put dollar sign on the value of art or on the value of music. And this is where it really gets divergent. Some people will be like, I do not understand jazz. What would be the value of that? We went through this like, a century ago? Where would we be without that music? So,
I think we have already had a value of art put on pretty much every country with COVID in terms of what is important and what industries are important and worthwhile maintaining and which ones have been left to the wayside a little bit. So that kind of decision has already been made on a governmental scale, at least in the UK. I don't know the procedures in place for the different industries and sectors of the economy in different countries necessarily.
Where would you spend your science voucher, Charlotte?
I think the biggest problem that is going to be a problem indefinitely is the climate situation. So whether that is renewable energy solutions, whether that is, I think they're looking into, is it microbes that can biodegrade plastic? It happens very, very slowly, but, possibly generating those and sorting out the plastic situation in the ocean. I don't know. I think probably focus on climate, but then you do have the worries about the more immediate things, like the more humanitarian issues, if that's COVID, if that's, as you said, cancer, which a lot of people are very passionate about and personally connected to possibly. So yeah, it's tricky. I think you do get into tricky situations because then humans might just leave their whole fortune to the RSPCA and their relatives will be like, oh, well, that was dumb. I could have used that for my children. But I suppose it is just putting that, I don't know, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I love dogs, but it is that, trust in the general public. Do we trust the general public more than we trust science?
Brilliant. So, I mean, there are a load of things there, which is great. So, we've had Polina sort of talking about, and James maybe about the value of fundamental science. How do we find that value and get the public to value it as well? Charlotte's, saying actually COVID's really changed our opinion possibly on science. We have to be a lot more practical. We've got COVID, we have the environmental crisis going on, the plastics in the oceans. Katie, you wanted to add something into the chat as well. Also to everyone else on here, if you don't want to say out loud, also do throw your thoughts into the chat as well. So, and then we can sort of bring them in, those new ideas. But off to you, Katie.
Thanks. First of all, it's obvious that people tend to would put their money in many different areas. So it seems that there would be plenty of diversity in funding. I mean, just few people spoke their thoughts, and they were all different areas. And whoever mentioned that half of the things we use every day came from the scientific inquiry into like space and such. To answer Mikey's question from a while ago, I would personally put it to the UAP or UFO, whatever people want to call it, research, because potentially maybe with a lower probability but high impact kind of thing, it would include quantum physics and such. Again, I think that there is much less danger of people misplacing that money if, you know, it's not all of the research funding done that way. That's why, to answer the Paulina's concern, because that's why I mentioned like the part of it would continue being as it is now. It's just regular people who have the right to vote, they would have kind of a right to vote for what science they wanted to see. And me personally, I trust science, but I definitely don't trust the scientists.
There we go. So Katie trusts science, but not necessarily the scientists. And she's also sort of maybe advocating for a portfolio investment to supporting science. Sunil, I think that tickled you a bit. Come in.
I was just trying to imagine, like, because of all the people, like of the different professions, like scientists, we don't get any bonuses, or we don't get any extra income for the work we do. So I think like we don't have any ulterior motives. That's how I feel like.
Do you feel that you're quite trustworthy? Is that what you're saying?
No, not that trust. I'm not saying I'm trustworthy. Yeah, but I think people who do science, it's not the comfortable job, but they still do it, not because of, I think, monetary incentives, but it's just because they're inquisitive. They want to know.
So you think you're more likely to come with quite an objective point of view, almost, that you're less likely to go into science if you've got maybe a political agenda, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, you sparked some thoughts there, Paulina. I'm going to go over to you next.
He's bringing a really excellent point. You know, every time I publish, I have to disclose financial interest in my research. All scientists have to disclose, do we have financial ties in our research? That is, am I a president of some biotech company who wants to publish my little biotech experiment and sell it for tidy profit to somebody else? We disclose the funding that we receive, like who funded our research. When you apply for grants, you disclose your financial ties to entities that might be considered unsavory. And that is, again, to remove this financial gain. I'm not saying that that is 100% true for 100% scientists, but it is something that it is ethically required from scientists in most publications, is to disclose your financial interests in the research, or some sort of things that people might perceive that you're going to gain something from it. And he's right. I mean, most of the time, I mean, we don't really get bonuses in academia, and mostly in academia, if there is a squabble, it's usually about like a title or who gets better office or parking spot or something like that. So, I mean, we really have nothing else to, other than that, gain from our research. Besides, of course, you know, the name and the title.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you. And then, Roshan, you also I probably pronounced your name incorrectly. Can you remind me how to pronounce your name?
It's Rasheen.
Rasheen, thank you. Thank you very much for bearing with me on that. Please come in and share your thoughts.
Yeah, so in who we trust, I figure at some point you've got to trust someone. And of all the groups of people to trust, scientists are probably my most favourite, I would think. But I think people not being involved in it for the money, although yes, you probably almost certainly wouldn't get into science for the money, anyone in a profession where they don't earn a lot is always going to have that weakness of needing more money and being persuaded by more money. And that's definitely a big fear in a lot of places, I think. Like you'll be corrupted because you have very little and you need something. And that
Okay.
kind of sucks. But yeah, and if I was going to pick where I'd put my ticket or what science I'd want, it'd probably also be climate, because that affects everyone, I guess.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So that's quite, I mean, some good points there. So on the one hand, scientists don't really go into their work for the money. Maybe they're less likely to be motivated. But, you know, at some point, if the pay is really bad, maybe that can also be a decision factor. We have Paulina, pointing out that actually science has a lot of gatekeepers. So, you know, you have to prove if you're being funded by someone. And Sunil saying, you know, actually, quite often we tend to be quite objective human beings as a group of human beings as scientists, so we're less likely to sort of come with an agenda. So I think there was also some really good stuff going on in the chat that I might want to open up. So we had Dee saying that science is art, but not all art is science. Non-science artists get funding, but when these artists get funding, we don't ask them what their work will be used for and what profit it will be make before funding them. So that's a bit interesting, sort of a new topic there. You know, actually, are scientists put under more scrutiny than artists, and is that fair? We've got a mix of...
Is an Arts Council application harder to fill out than, a Research Council application?
Paper. Yes, and submitting a paper to Nature or something.
I don't know the answer. I guess we'll never know the answer to that. But Dee, if you want to come on and explain that a bit more, do that. You know, I'm quite keen. I thought I saw Larice as well putting her camera on. So if you want to also chime in, even if it's just to say what you'd spend your science voucher on.
I'm not sure. And I know that, Dee, you don't have a camera. So if you haven't got a mic either, just do throw any of the responses you have in the chat, because everyone's tech setup is different. So, I mean, but we've got a few scientists here. We've got a few artists. We've got a few people who are sort of maybe affiliated to neither. We've got, where are we going to go with this, guys? I mean, has anyone else thought about, they've had time to think about how they would spend their science voucher?
Well, I mean, I think in a way we were talking about this in the last session as well, this question of science versus art. And that, to me, it brings up the question of creativity. And what about the creativity? We were kind of touched on it last week, but, are we acknowledging the creative side of science when we communicate science?
Charlotte, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I actually was a guest on a podcast that was discussing this exact thing about sort of science VR, again, two warring camps potentially. And I think the more you look into it, the more overlap you see. Obviously, scientific research has to have a huge amount of creativity and imagination behind it. It's not just all, beakers and data and number analysis, is it? Like, to have the ideas and the kind of bravery to go for these ideas, that's a huge kind of creativity and strength of character. And in the same way, the more and more you get into artistic theory and, sort of proportion and color theory and, the way Leonardo da Vinci, for example, some of the old classic artists, they were also essentially like mathematicians and scientists. They'd study anatomy deeply. They'd be biologists. They'd have their huge, musculature drawings and, drawings of skeletons and everything. And it was much more the two together. And they were craftsmen and women. They were mostly craftsmen who did, they could they could literally depict something in complete clarity and in a completely neat way. So they weren't artistic figures. They were kind of like just hugely scientifically minded people who knew the theories and knew the principles and knew the mathematic breakdown of space to be able to portray this here or that on the ceiling or whatever it was. And it's only recently, or relatively recently, that art has become that kind of hippy dippy, you know, Damien Hirst, you just chuck stuff on a canvas and then it's art thing with not a lot of substance. I think a lot of people see it as, which is why there can be a certain amount of derision against art when it should, you know, I think at its core have that mathematic scientific foundation to make you understand why you're putting that color there, because that's, you know, it's all about this UV spectrum, isn't it? That kind of color analysis. So yeah, I think it's definitely better to be aware of the nuance, and it's not black and white.
Brilliant, thank you. Neither is Damien Hirst's paintings, I think. You've sparked lots of interest there, actually. We had Larice in the chat. I agree, there's always creativity with science. Dee saying science is art, that it's the same thing, which is kind of echoing what Charlotte was saying about there's only recently been this division. Margot, Charlotte saying that maybe your comments on Damien Hirst are a bit controversial. I'm going to go to James because you've got your hand up and you wanted to respond to that point.
Well, yeah, it's not that long ago. It's still a living memory where every chemist had to be their own glassblower. And going further back, before the advent of cheap and easy photography, anybody who was a serious biologist had to be a fairly serious sketch artist as well. You know, as we move away from everybody doing their own very hands-on research work and sample collecting, dissection, sample prep, mounting, sketching, then that's kind of lost. But yeah, science and art, they're just the two sets of learned skills, and you need skills at expression to be a good scientist. I mean, one of the other public engagement projects that I'm doing at the moment was I produced a 5-minute short film from the perspective of a cell. And it's trying to use ways that people will have a better chance of retaining the information if we speak to them in a way that people understand better than walls of facts. Walls of facts are fine if you're in there and you can see how you're going to process it, but people retain better information when it's presented as part of a narrative they can understand than if it's presented as a lecture. And so trying more ways of doing that and better representation, even for within science. I mean, if you look at the various ways that you can produce a graph of data and how some of them can be absolutely the devil to read. So one of the really nice things that happened in genomics, where I used to work a while back, was the idea of, hang on, we don't need this huge long graph. We could just take the ends, wrap them around, and make a circle. You could see things much more easily that way. It's a nice compact space. And, you know, there's the art of displaying what you found that is critical for a researcher.
You're getting lots of nods from the group as well. So so it seems like it's a popular, something that we're in agreement. We think that these tools aren't really that separated. So you know, why do we think that there is this separation that seems to exist right now? We've got a group of people, it feels like, who are maybe broadly in agreement. Why do we think that there's this rift, this polarization? Just to bring us back to the beginning, Mikey, you want to answer that, perhaps?
I mean, I just think, you know, from the perspective of an artist, I think, you know, you should really be keeping up to date with the latest science. I mean, I read a lot of stuff about psychology, for example, and linguistics, because that informs how we do the chat, actually, and, you know, some of the things that are being picked up. But also, I feel like we can inform. I mean, we've actually done some collaboration with linguistic people as well. And psychologists. So I think there's definitely, you know, I mean, I think even between different artists, and I would like to see more collaborations between people of different disciplines. I don't really see them as scientists, as artists, a bit like Dee. They're just researchers all, in a way, all together.
Okay, so we've got that, you know, maybe you think they're sort of everyone's kind of a researcher all together, and that's Mikey saying my perspective as an artist, and I've worked with linguistic professors, researchers, I guess. A bit of
I don't
bit of
think
both.
any of them had made professor yet. One of them
not
had,
yet.
actually. One of them had, yeah.
And well, does that matter? Charlotte, you put in the chat the education system with an exclamation mark.
This is something I'm really passionate about because I think our country does it in ways that is very inferior to a lot of other countries. So the fact that at the age of, I think it's been commented by Val there, 16, 18, you're meant to know what path you should be on, when even as we know in American universities, you can still be doing modules. You do a general bachelor degree, and you'll be able to all throughout. I think is it only the third year that you actually pick what you're going to major in, and that flexibility would have just been so useful for me. I felt like I was pigeonholed into doing an academic degree, and whether that was right or not, I don't know. But I felt so frustrated at A level when I had to pick my things. I think I wanted to do about 6 A levels because I was like, I've got more to learn in all of these things, but you can't. I managed to force them into letting me do 4, but I wanted to do more. I wanted to learn more. But then at that point, I had already decided I was going to pivot in. I think I did English, history, art, and theatre studies. Loved them, but there's always been that I really wanted to do biology. I wanted to learn more chemistry, but it just wasn't possible with the way I sort of tried to anticipate my career going. And now I'm here, 27 years old, wishing I'd have learned more. And then how do you make up that lack of, time? Now that I am getting more interested in science, but at that time I was like, am I going to be an actor? Am I going to be an artist? And I did a little bit of both, but now I really wish I'd done a bit more science, and it was a bit too late.
Is this experience that other people identify with, maybe from the other side, or Roisin, sorry, there we go. I'm very sorry, the panic got me there.
Yeah, I kind of do very much agree with this. Starting so early must be quite difficult. Like, I miss science. Like, I've not done science since I was essentially 16 years old. And like, you're asking, should we ask the public things about science? And I'm sitting here going, I have GCSE level understanding of like some of this stuff and a crazy high level of interest, but that's just anything I can Google and, any talk I can go to. I can't afford to research science now. I just have to read an article that the most people have told me is good, and that's the only way I have of understanding or assessing it. So yeah, I wish science was more accessible, I think, because then the public can make informed decisions.
So actually, yes, we need to. You've got Roisin and Charlotte saying, actually maybe we need to extend that period of learning a bit longer, so that actually the general public can feel like they're more informed, that they can engage a bit more. Larice, you have turned your camera on. Would you like to add a point into the chat? No problem if you don't, but just checking if you want to add a point into the chat there.
Yeah, I think science is definitely creativity, and I do think it's a bit hard when you're younger to kind of know what you want to do straight away. It's kind of like you have to choose your 3 A levels, and then if you want to be a lawyer, you choose your English or whatever it is you need, and you study that, and you become a lawyer. If you want to be a doctor, you study the sciences. But what if you want to do both? I mean, I study science, but I'm also pretty creative. And I'm a producer as well, so it's kind of balancing those two things, the creativity and the science. But then, I mean, it's creative as well, so yeah, but it's hard to know what you want to do.
And did you say you're studying science now? You're working in science now?
Yeah, I'm actually doing my dissertation in immunology, so yeah.
Oh, fantastic! A good one to be get an even better area now. Exactly, you'll be in demand. So brilliant, thank you, Larice. So I'm noticing, just as looking at the chat, we're coming up to sort of the last 12 minutes of our session. So for those people who haven't done Talkaoke before, this is the point of a time where we know that the clock is ticking, both metaphorically and literally. So we are going to do our final thoughts around the Talkaoke table. So in this case, it's a virtual table, but we're going to go to everyone in the chat to share your final thoughts. It can be a new point that you want to make. It can be a reflection on the discussion as a whole. It can be anything you like, really. You guys are our guests, so you can take us where you guys want to go. So has anyone got any final thoughts they want to kick us off with? It's a big responsibility, but I'm sure that one of you can take it. There we go, Katie. Fantastic. Congratulations as well.
I am not the biggest fan of typing, so I'll just say the answer, because we've had kind of a discussion with James in the chat about machine learning and AI and the biases that are present in there. But whereas a lot of current algorithms are trained on large amounts of data, there are algorithms which learn new things and new methods without that huge data input. And one of the more recent examples I'm aware of is where Google was basically training AI to pilot an airship. It was kind of a balloon, and to go from point A to point B. And they were just hoping that, it will go up or down depending on the wind to eventually get to the point B. And they found that one of the algorithms was doing something very, very weird. It kept on going sideways, and they tried to reset it over and over and over again, but it just tried to go back to some very weird pattern. And at the end, they decided just to let it be and figure out what happens. And it shocked all of the scientists there, because it figured out tacking mechanism, which was used by sailors a long time ago. And none of the people who programmed the AI had any awareness of this thing. Yes, exactly, Roshan. And so essentially AI figured out and got from point A to point B in the fastest time possible, better than any other competing balloons, so to say, because it discovered a mechanism which some people were aware hundreds of years ago, but nowadays almost nobody is. And it didn't come from any bias from large amount of data or anything like that. So AI at the moment is turning into the place where it will not need any data to learn. I mean, it will need, but incredibly tiny amount. It will just learn from the basic principles. So once we get to that point, I would be happy to throw government science and everything there, because I honestly, from my experience, I just can't trust people.
Fantastic. So Katie has left us maybe with her final thought and saying, in AI we trust, which is an exciting, I think it's an exciting final thought to leave us on.
There's been a lot of science fiction written about that. Full stop.
Full stop. Mikey's not saying any more. Who else can we go to for a final thought? We've got Polina, fantastic. Come on in, your final thought.
I would say liberal arts education. I'm putting my money on that. I teach in a liberal arts college. It is not science-y 100%. It's not artsy 100%, but it allows people to do what Charlotte was not allowed to do. To find who you are, because that's what college should have been about. Yes, you spend maybe a year or two poking around, looking at various things, but in the meantime, you get knowledge. And that's what remains after your education is over, is this wisdom of knowing and not knowing and seeking for more knowledge. And that comes from exposure to a variety of education.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. A very, very brilliantly succinct final thought from Polina about these concepts of a broader education, allowing people to discover and give themselves tools to find out more and to sort of take part in maybe like a debate that we've been having for the whole of today. Charlotte, you're nodding, so that maybe perhaps that's a good point to go to you for your final thought.
Oh, okay. I was just giving Polina my encouragement there. I 100% agree. I think that's essentially why I went for my degree, which was archaeology, because I could study archaeological illustration and archaeological photography and get that creative itch. But there was also that, I could study paleontology and, study bones under microscopes and stuff. There was that scope to have a little bit of both. And I had to struggle to find that in the UK. And I know it's not the case in different countries, but yes, some kind of restructuring, just systemic restructuring of the education system feels necessary, let alone the fact that we're now forced into doing master's degrees. The degree itself isn't enough anymore. For a lot of different industries, it's assumed you go and get a master's. So the kind of devaluing of a degree in general is also a problem. And then obviously a PhD again on top of that to further distinguish yourself. So I think the whole system needs some kind of restructuring.
Fantastic. So a call to action there from Charlotte. We need to restructure our education system. I'm looking over just maybe at my screen to some of the people who've taken part. I was going to go to Alex next, if that's all right. Can you share with us your final thoughts?
Just building on what Polina and Charlotte said, I totally agree. But most importantly, so that we actually get as many people as we can, is that it needs to be free and accessible. So we can get all these amazing, talented people we have all over the world into higher education and really, pick their brains and make all our science for everyone.
Excellent, thank you, Alex. So we also need to make it free. So maybe touching on some themes we had before. We were talking about our science vouchers. We were talking about money and who's doing the funding. And actually, yes, who's getting the education? Are they having to pay for it? So I'm going to go for next. Sunil, have you got any points that any final thoughts you want to share with the table?
Yeah, no, it's more like agreeing with what Charlotte and Paulina said. That's what, for example, in India, we need to take some social science humanities courses during a bachelor's, which is a must for technical students. So I think that is, and also the humanities students, then they need to take some scientific education, engineering courses. I think this is really important because science provides the framework for, for theology and philosophy, and the humanities, they provide an objective for science.
Fantastic, thank you. That's
completely objective, but because science can tend to be really objective, not considering the other zillion aspects. And having this courses on humanities, it really helped me. At least, yeah.
Fantastic. So actually, yes, having the access to humanities, you feel it's made you a better scientist today.
Yeah, and the same for the humanities students as well. So yeah, because that's the main problem now, bridging the gap between the non-scientists and scientists, I guess.
Fantastic. No, that's a wonderful final thought. Thank you. I'm going to go to James next. You've got your hand up. What is your final thought?
So, Rasheen, you were saying that you'd never really done much science since you left school. If you've got an interest in learning more, I don't think it's ever been easier to sort of dip your toe in something. So I never studied history at school, and I've been listening to the BBC's You're Dead to Me podcast, which is absolutely wonderful. It's a academic historian and a comedian covering a topic, and then the comedian is quizzed on it. And there's quite a few now podcasts of the like that take this format for science or academic communication. And around the UK, there's events like Pint of Science. So you can go looking for them, you can find them. We're not scary people. We go to the pub just like you, and we'd like to actually chat about things that we think are really exciting. But I think it's getting over that first hurdle and saying, you know what, I'm gonna have another go at this thing that I never really tried. I find it fun. I love learning things.
Fantastic. But James saying that scientists, we are friendly people, and actually advocating for a new format that perhaps we have a little bit today as well, of getting scientists to sit down with artists or comedians or other people. Rasheen, I'm going to go to you for your response and your final thought.
I'll say this is hilarious because I was going to say, don't be afraid to talk when you don't know things and to welcome people in that don't know about things. But also, I'm the ultimate jack of all trades, so I research everything all the time ever. So, I know bits and bobs about science, but no formal education as such. But definitely try everything. It's very valuable.
Excellent, thank you, Rasheen, as well. Just for the people who maybe can't come onto the chat directly, we've got Stella. I'm going to go through a few of your things here, but Stella's saying that the lack of trust is also due to the fact that adults are scared of science. Like we said, James, Rasheen, kind of saying, maybe scientists aren't scary. We just need to get to know them a little bit better. We're all just humans, just maybe specialising in different areas. I'm just going to go down to D as well, who wanted to respond to this question on AI. So AIs are not intelligent currently. The result is an overlapping multi-stage, I think maybe, lookup table. The answer's already in there once trained. There's quite a lot there. I'm not sure whether I fully understand it.
There's some philosophical questions there about the nature of knowledge, and is knowledge something that exists, the Platonic idea of knowledge, that knowledge is out there to be grabbed, and all AI is doing is finding that knowledge. But also, I really want to pick up on Roisin's point about, not being afraid to say you don't know. And I think in a way, we're always, the person that knows is always seen as the clever person. But to me, the person who says, I don't know, is actually the clever person.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mikey. So the person who doesn't know, perhaps they are the wise person. Simon, I'm going to go to you for your final thoughts in our last few minutes.
Too much. Basically, I guess somebody was saying earlier on that they don't trust scientists. I'd say that I don't trust the public. So that public, the token system of everybody being able to decide, I don't think people are well enough educated whatsoever to make any decisions. However, to be positive instead of my usual cynicism, I agree with what virtually everybody else has said on this, that democratizing education and raising the standard of, scientific awareness, kind of dissolving the demarcations between arts and science and stuff, and encouraging people. And like Mikey just said, it's very important to express vulnerability and to be able to be comfortable with that, and also see that there's benefit in shared understanding of things rather than value in scarcity. So I think, at the risk of sounding like a proper, socialist, which I am, but to go anti-capitalist as usual, essentially the whole thing that scarcity adds value to everything makes people hoard information, hoard skills, and hoard powers, and enact things to benefit themselves and their demographic. But actually, if we looked at the fact that real value was amongst people sharing and bringing everybody up to the same levels, then that could be much better. And if we manage to do that with the education system, which, like Alex said, is by making it free, by making it more inclusive, by making it more exciting and more people more enthusiastic about it, then I would trust the public to spend their science vouchers on whatever they wanted. But I think that might take quite a long time.
Brilliant. What a great final thought. So much there that we could take on to another Talkaoke session.
Could write a book with that final thought.
We could write a book with that final thought. So we're coming up to our end now. We have probably 1 minute where if anyone has one final thought that they would really like to say, I'm going to say Val.
Out there, aren't there,
yeah. Val said, so educate the public, get more people like me involved. Is there anyone with any final thoughts before we play out our outro music? Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much from Charlotte. There we go. We'll take that. Thank you, Charlotte. Well, we want to say, I think, a big thank you then to the Cambridge Festival. First and foremost, to the Welcome and Genome Campus. Thank you for everyone who's joined us here today. This has been an absolutely brilliant session. I'm quite sad for it to end, but don't worry. If you enjoyed what you saw, look us up with Talkaoke on the People Speak. We do virtual events. One day we will be back to doing in-person events as well, which is very exciting. So follow us on Instagram or all your social medias. Follow us on Twitter. Also do the same for the Welcome Genome Campus as well. They've got loads of great stuff. And so you can find out more about what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. But other than that, Mikey, I think it might be time to play our outro music.
I'm on it.
He's on it. So thank you very much, guys. I'm going to start waving. You guys can start waving as well. And at this point, we're just going to get you guys to leave the chat. It's been fantastic. I'm just enjoying reading all the comments that have been going on. Just lots of thank yous. Thank you guys. You've made it a really brilliant session.
Thank you.
Give us a follow on socials. Thank you guys. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Stella.
Keep the conversation going. And this is just the beginning, as always. Come to other Talkaokes and do it yourself.
Yes, come and join. Well, we've been streaming on Facebook as well. Follow us on Twitter. So if you've got any other thoughts, comment on Twitter as well. Get involved.
People out there on YouTube, if you've got a comment, please, we do actually read them. So
we do.
Yeah. So just even if it's just to say I'm here, I watched it. Anything. Comment, please do.
But most importantly, thank you so much, guys. And we'll hopefully see you at some events soon, maybe soon in person as well. Get up to Cambridge at some point. I'm going to keep playing the music.